My name is Nicola Williams, and I was appointed as a Crown Court Recorder in 2009, and I have been actively involved as a Crown Court Recorder since I did my first trial in 2010. In terms of my ethnic background, both of my parents are from Guyana, and both of them are Windrush generation migrants. In terms of where I went to school, I had a mixed state and private education. In my childhood, I lived in two different countries. I have mostly lived in the UK, where I was born and raised. But in my middle years, from about 10 to 14, I lived in Guyana. As a family, we went there, and I went to school there. Well, I'm much more introverted than people will think, and they're always very surprised because of my choice of career. But I think what it is, I'd always liked debating, even at school, and I particularly liked sticking up for people who couldn't stick up for themselves. And I think that was it. So I probably wouldn't argue on behalf of myself unless really pushed, but I would absolutely do it on behalf of somebody else. And also I like the intellectual challenge of the law. To a certain extent, my late father had wanted to become a barrister, and I think if things were different, he would have done that. And he came to the UK, in fact, to try and do that. He did other very interesting things, but he didn't become a barrister. And I know in a way I've fulfilled his dream, but I've done it because of myself. I haven't done it because of my father, but I'm sure that was an influence as well. I remember when we were younger, one of the things he always did, and he didn't have, at this time, he didn't have a sort of particularly fancy job. He worked in the post office, I believe, at this time. He'd done a number of different jobs. But one of the things he always did, he always read the Times, and he always read the Times law reports. And so from a very early age, I had been introduced to the Times law reports as a result. Well, I was a barrister in private practice for about 16 years, and then I left private practice to become an ombudsman. And those were actually very interesting years because I was working, I didn't see it then, but I was actually working in a quasi-judicial capacity when I did that. My first two ombudsman roles were dealing with the police in England and Wales. And then I went to the Cayman Islands and I lived and worked there as the ombudsman. So I've had a very different route to being a judge. Yes, the short answer is yes, most definitely. The longer answer is this. The profession, when I started, and even now, is still very, very largely white, very largely male, particularly at the more senior ends. That doesn't mean that there aren't ethnic minorities or women or people from other socioeconomic groups, both at the bar and as judges. I'm very glad to say that there are, and that number is increasing all the time. To be a black woman at the time that I qualified as a barrister absolutely was a hurdle, no question about that. But then it's whether or not you believe it's a hurdle. It's a bit like the bumblebee that really aerodynamically shouldn't be able to fly because its body is too big for its wings, but it does. And that's because, as the saying goes, the bumblebee doesn't know that it can't fly. So you have to think, well, yes, intellectually, these are barriers, but I know that I can overcome those. And I think it was much more acute when I first became a barrister. But apart from my own belief in my ability to do it, I was also very, very lucky that both of my parents, not only were they hugely, hugely in favor of any kind of education, but particularly in education or a career with intellectual rigor like the law, but they absolutely believed that I could do it. So there was no one in my immediate circle that told me I couldn't do that. Oh my gosh, there are loads. Well, first of all, that they have very, very few women judges, and that they have no ethnic minority judges at all, and that if you are a judge, you're 100 years old, you are very stiff in your manner, stiff and pompous, and that everybody had to go to private school and Oxford or Cambridge. And those are the misconceptions. Now, misconceptions always have a grain of truth in them, except you don't have to be 100 years old to be a judge. That clearly because we wouldn't have any if that was the case. But those, and also that you can't like regular things. So as an example, one of the things that I have been doing, which I really love since I came back from the Cayman Islands, so I've been doing it since I've been a recorder, is that I go into schools. Before the pandemic, I'd be doing it once a month for an organisation called Speakers for Schools. And I go into schools that are mostly in London, but I would do it outside, with a sort of very ethnically diverse student population. And I would talk to them about my career. And you'd be amazed about, if I talk about the kind of music that I like, for example, or the kind of things that I like to do, some of the students are just slack-jawed with amazement. Some of the teachers actually too, because they don't think that you would actually like, I don't know what they think you'd like to do, but they don't think you'd like to do things that regular people do. For example, I like, amongst the many types of music I like what we would call old school R&B. I like other stuff as well. I love classical music as well, very much. But I suppose I'd sometimes use that to illustrate a point that I like both classical music and R&B music. I was privately educated, but I was also state educated. And I'm a Black woman in a profession where there are very few Black women, and particularly as judges. And yet here I am telling you that you can do this. So you don't have to choose to be one or the other. People are capable of much more than that. And life isn't so binary anyway. So, and I'm happy to say, every single time I go and speak to young people, there's always at least one of them that contacts me afterwards and says, I wasn't sure what I was going to do once I left school, but now I think I want to go and do law. So that I'm really pleased about. Assuming that the person who's asking me this is already a lawyer, no matter how early the stage they are, I would say, well, you know, you've got to really love the law. And I would say if it's someone relatively young, let's say someone in their 20s, I would say you need a good 10 to 15 years life experience, I think, behind you before you decide to take that on, because it's a big responsibility. And your life does change. It doesn't change like hugely, but it does. And you can still have a life, but there's certain things that would change. So I would say, are you prepared for those kinds of changes to your life? Are you prepared for the responsibility that goes with being a judge, including having to take someone's liberty away if you're talking about crime? And I would imagine if you're talking in the family division, possibly taking someone's children away. It's not an area that I practice in, but I would imagine it's that. And do you love the law? Because you have to love it as a pure subject, and you have to love it as an applied subject. It's a bit like pure and applied maths. You have to love it for itself, but you have to love it for what can be done with it. And you have to be the kind of person who can withstand pressure, whether it's sort of emotional pressure, moral pressure, sometimes, depending on your case, if it's going to be, there could be pressure of public opinion, depending on if it's a newsworthy case or not. So all of those things I would put to them. But I really love the way that in England and Wales we have set it up, which is that people become recorders first, and they can do it, so they can do it part-time for as long as they want, forever if that's what they want to do, or they can do it unless and until they apply for a full-time role. But doing it part-time eases you into it, and you can see whether it is in fact for you. I suppose for people who don't know anything about judges and how they're appointed, the way in which people are appointed now, certainly the way I was appointed, you had a 5-stage procedure to go through, a 5-stage process, I should say, to go through, which was very rigorous. And at the time that I started, they had only just started that. But I actually think, as rigorous as it is, I actually think it's one of the best things that's happened to the judiciary, because it really does level out the playing field. When judges weren't appointed like that, it was not transparent. And it doesn't mean to say that judges who weren't appointed in that way aren't good judges, because they're excellent judges. But the process needed to be more transparent. So I'm very happy about that. Very much enjoy being a judge. I very much enjoy doing it part-time as a recorder. If and when the time comes and I would want to do it as a full-timer, I shall consider it then. But at the moment, I'm very happy with the balance of my life as it is now.